My name is Carmen Ellis. I am 42 years old, born and raised in Milwaukee, and for the past 11 years, I ran operations at a logistics firm called StratusPack. My title was Director of Operations, but what I really did was keep the entire company from falling apart. I managed vendor relationships, built our freight tracking systems from the ground up, and trained half the people who are still working there today. I was not flashy, I was not loud, but I was dependable. The kind of dependable that makes everyone assume you will always be there, no matter how many fires you put out. And one day, that quiet consistency got mistaken for irrelevance. It happened on a Thursday. I was called into the executive meeting room by Bryce Lockhart, our CEO. Bryce is the kind of man who uses the word optics more than truth and thinks a PowerPoint can fix a supply chain. He did not look me in the eye when he said it. He smiled with that corporate tension in his jaw and said, "We are making some strategic realignments, Carmen. Your role is shifting into something more, advisory." I blinked. Advisory? He nodded like he had just given me a promotion. "You will support our new Director of Modern Strategy during this transition phase. It is really an elevation into thought leadership." That was the moment I knew. I had just been benched. They did not fire me. That would have been too clean. Instead, they boxed me up in a title that sounded important but came with no authority. No team, no budget, and worst of all, no explanation. They gave my position to someone new, someone younger, someone who called herself a logistics futurist on LinkedIn. Her name was Taryn Bloom, and she was 29, all sparkle and spin, with a resume that read more like a TED Talk summary than an actual work history. She once gave a presentation on empathy-driven KPIs. That should tell you everything you need to know. I watched her roll into the office that Monday with her almond milk latte, wearing heels too high for a warehouse tour, and speaking in hashtags. "We are going to optimize the value funnel," she told the ops team during her first stand-up. Half of them stared blankly. The other half texted me after the meeting to ask if she was serious. I said nothing, because saying anything would sound bitter, and right then I could not afford to look bitter. I had a front row seat to what was about to happen, and I knew better than to interrupt the show before the curtain rose. What stung the most was not the demotion itself. It was how easily they all went along with it. Bryce called it bold leadership. HR said I was a cultural asset. Taryn thanked me for being a grounding presence, as if I were the office houseplant. There was no applause for the years I spent cutting freight costs or redesigning our entire import process during a trade crisis. No mention of the time I negotiated an 11th-hour deal that saved us $300,000 in port penalties. Just a polite push into the background, as if I were some outdated operating system they could sunset. But here is the thing no one at StratusPack understood about me. I do not need a title to be effective. I do not need a corner office to know what is going on, because I built the bones of that company. I knew which vendors were teetering, which managers were faking their reports, and exactly how many containers we were behind schedule in Los Angeles. Taryn could put on all the lipstick she wanted, but under that gloss, she was clueless. I had seen interns with more awareness of cross-dock management than she had. She moved into my old office the following week, did not even change the nameplate. Just plopped her tablet down, waved to the staff, and started rearranging the furniture. I watched her through the glass as she set up a ring light for branding consistency and scheduled daily Zoom huddles with buzzword-heavy agendas. I smiled, not because I was happy, not because I was okay, but because I knew something she did not. Logistics is not about language. It is about trust. And she had not earned a single ounce of it. So I sat at my new desk, tucked in the corner of the third floor, and quietly watched her fumble with the freight dashboard I built from scratch. She did not know how to read the manifest logs. She skipped the vendor check-ins I had once run like clockwork. She marked 2 urgent international shipments as pending clarification, which meant they sat in limbo until customs flagged them. And through it all, she kept smiling, that glossy, clueless smile. It was almost impressive. Almost. I kept my tone professional. I did not gossip. I did not sabotage. But every time she stumbled, I took note. Every call I was still looped in on by vendors who refused to talk to her, I logged. Every time she asked me to explain how this legacy flow works, I recorded the details, not to get revenge, yet, but to be ready, because this was not just about me being pushed aside. This was about a company betting on the wrong horse, and I knew the exact moment they would realize it. All I had to do was wait. Taryn was polished, I will give her that. She walked like she had already won the room and talked like she was being interviewed for a documentary. Every sentence she said came with a dramatic pause and a buzzword cocktail. We need to unlock value through data-forward alignment, she told the procurement team. Our goal is to disrupt stagnation and drive motion intelligence. I had worked in logistics for over a decade, and I still had no idea what that meant. But Bryce ate it up. He would nod like she had just solved world hunger every time she opened her mouth. All I saw was a glittering surface with no depth. The first thing she did after moving into my office was strip the place of anything that looked like actual work had ever been done there. She took down the whiteboard I had used to track container flow and replaced it with a framed print that said, "Innovate with intention." My freight schedules were replaced with mood lighting. She spent her first Friday afternoon installing a voice assistant that turned off the lights and played jazz when she said, "Inspire me." Meanwhile, we had a backlog of invoices that had not been reconciled since she took over. But hey, at least the room had good vibes. She renamed the operations dashboard I had built over 5 years, called it the Movement Hub. I still remember how proud I was the first time we launched the original version. It tracked live shipment status, customs flags, vendor performance metrics, and internal handoff times. It was simple, effective, and fast. Now? It was a slideshow of pie charts and motivational quotes. She stripped out the back-end data links because she thought the color scheme looked too cold. She added animations that slowed everything down and embedded a video of her giving a team pep talk. It was like watching a reality show layered over a traffic jam. One day, she called a department-wide meeting and spent 40 minutes presenting a new logistics transformation roadmap. The first slide said, Phase 1, Activate Digital Belief. I almost laughed. She explained that our new mission was not just about moving freight, but moving people emotionally. My jaw nearly hit the table. Half the team nodded because they were too stunned to push back. The other half stared at me, silently asking what on earth was happening. I said nothing. I kept my face calm, let her dig the hole deeper. She started calling daily meetings huddles and weekly updates sync rituals. Everything had to sound futuristic. She created a folder in the shared drive called Taryn's Think Tank, where she dumped every idea she had, no matter how disconnected from reality. One document was titled Leveraging Intermodal Karma. It was not a joke. She actually typed that. I kept a copy for myself, just in case I needed proof one day that this was not just bad management. It was pure delusion. Of course, her modern strategy did not include talking to the people who actually moved product. She never once sat with the warehouse team. She ignored the port delays I flagged in the monthly vendor brief. When Marco from Horizon Freight requested a status call, she had an assistant send him a pre-recorded video of her explaining the vision. Marco forwarded it to me and asked, "Is she okay?" I replied, "We are still assessing." But the worst part was not her incompetence. It was how confident she was in it. She walked around like she had reinvented global shipping. And because she looked the part, young, energetic, full of TED Talk energy, Bryce kept defending her. He told me, "She brings a new lens." I wanted to ask him what good a new lens was if the camera had no film, but I bit my tongue. I was not going to be the bitter woman who could not handle change. I was going to be the one who watched the crash coming and stayed calm enough to document every twist on the way down. Still, it stung, watching her butcher everything I had built and act like she had improved it, seeing people hesitate to question her because she sounded smart when she talked fast, and knowing that if I spoke up too soon, I would look jealous, petty, or stuck in the past. So I waited. I helped when asked, nodded in meetings, and stayed quiet when she botched a freight routing protocol that cost us thousands, not out of fear, but because I knew what she did not. This industry has no patience for pretense. Sooner or later, the work speaks. And when it does, no buzzword in the world can cover the silence. It took less than 4 weeks for the first real cracks to show. By then, invoices were already piling up with mismatched data, container logs were missing timestamps, and the customs team flagged 2 critical shipments that were filed under the wrong category. One was medical-grade hardware headed to Ontario. The other was a seasonal retail shipment bound for Phoenix, late by 5 days and incurring penalty fees. Both errors traced back to Taryn's newly streamlined process. She had replaced our verification checklist with a color-coded confidence grid that relied on visual symbols instead of actual documentation. The results were as bad as you would expect. Horizon Freight, our largest logistics partner, had been patient at first. They knew I was still around, even if I had been shoved into a back seat. Marco DeLuca, Horizon's West Coast lead and one of the sharpest minds in shipping, had worked with me for 6 years. We had been through labor strikes, container shortages, and tariff rollbacks together. He had seen me fix routing problems with a laptop on my knee from an airport gate. So when delays started stacking up, he did not go to Taryn first. He called me. "Carmen, I have got 2 late freights with your company's name on them," he said, "and someone just sent me a shipment brief in PowerPoint." I knew what he was talking about. Taryn had started preparing vendor-facing decks using stock icons and inspirational taglines. She thought it made us look more aligned. Marco was not impressed. "Is she serious?" he asked. "I need bills of lading, not branding exercises." I apologized. I promised to look into it. Then I did what I always do. I quietly fixed the paperwork and pushed it through customs myself. The real breaking point came during a vendor coordination call. Horizon, along with 2 other shipping lines, had flagged issues with our container documentation. Taryn insisted on leading the meeting. She wore a headset, stood in front of a backdrop with the StratusPack logo, and delivered what I can only describe as a motivational speech about redefining cross-boundary fulfillment models. When Marco asked about the missing documentation for the Ontario shipment, she smiled and said, "We are building invisible throughput architecture to simplify how the data moves." There was silence. The kind of silence that says, "What did I just hear?" A few seconds later, Marco called my cell directly. I stepped outside the meeting room to take it. "Carmen," he said, "does she even know what a container is?" I laughed. I did not answer, because the truth was, I honestly was not sure. By week 5, internal complaints had started to trickle in. Carla from finance flagged over 20 invoices that were submitted with the wrong vendor codes. Raj in compliance noticed that 3 trade documents were submitted late, risking customs penalties. But the most alarming issue came from procurement. 2 of our overseas partners reported they had not been able to get clear instructions from anyone on Taryn's team. One of them had rerouted their shipment through a competitor's warehouse just to avoid dealing with the confusion. That was when I knew. This was not just cosmetic failure, it was real damage. Taryn, of course, had no idea. Or maybe she did and just thought she could out-talk the facts. She kept sending out upbeat emails with lines like, "Let us celebrate progress, not perfection," and "Innovation always brings friction." Meanwhile, I was working late just to stop things from falling apart completely. I updated the freight logs manually, I corrected vendor routing numbers in the back end, and I made sure Horizon got every document they needed, on time, in full, and without the drama. What kept me going was not just pride. It was a quiet, steady rage. Not explosive, not reckless. Just this slow-burning sense of injustice that someone could smile their way into a job they had no business handling, while the rest of us were left to clean up their mess. Every time Taryn tossed around another phrase like logistics empowerment pipeline, I wrote it down. Not because I wanted to mock her, but because I knew one day someone would ask, "How did this happen?" And I would be ready with every quote, every file, every missed deadline. StratusPack was bleeding from the inside, but no one at the top could see it yet. Bryce was still dazzled by her polished image. The board saw charts and slogans. But I saw the truth. The foundation was cracking, and the ones who had poured the concrete were now being treated like background noise. Fine by me, because when the building finally started to shake, they would know exactly who to call. And I was not going to answer with a smile. I was going to answer with proof. I was not supposed to be involved anymore, at least not in any official capacity. According to my new title, I was a transition advisor, which meant I was expected to float around, offer vague support, and politely step back while Taryn reshaped the department into her personal playground. But logistics is not something you can just walk away from. Not when you have built it from scratch. Not when real people are counting on things to work. And certainly not when your replacement is actively sinking the ship. So I started cleaning up after her, quietly, one file at a time. It began with a customs manifest that never made it to the Port Authority. I found it sitting in an unsent draft on a junior analyst's desktop. Taryn had told the team to trust the flow of her new auto distribution system. The problem? It never sent the files. The result? A shipment bound for Calgary got flagged for non-compliance, costing us over $3,000 in delay penalties. I stepped in, manually completed the filing, and sent it directly to our customs contact with an apology. No one needed to know who fixed it. The shipment cleared by morning. Next came the payment reconciliation issues. Vendors were emailing daily, asking where their checks were, and our finance system was riddled with duplicates and mismatches. Taryn had changed our naming convention again to make it more readable. In the process, she broke 3 critical macros that fed invoice data to the accounts team. I spent 2 nights restoring the formulas and rebuilding the master tracker she had carelessly deleted. Then I trained her assistant, off the record, just so someone on her team would not keep tripping over the basics. I never said a word to her about it. Janessa, our procurement lead, started noticing. She pulled me aside near the loading dock one morning, holding a half-drunk coffee and a clipboard of flagged orders. "You're the only reason this place is still moving freight," she said under her breath. I just nodded. There was nothing to say. She knew I could not take credit, and I was not interested in recognition. I had something else in mind: patience, documentation, leverage. If you shout too early, they call it noise. But if you build a quiet case, step by step, it becomes impossible to ignore. Taryn, meanwhile, kept floating above it all. She hosted team alignment circles in the break room where she asked people to write down how they felt about our transformation journey. She ordered branded coffee mugs that said, "Move with purpose," and distributed them like trophies. The irony was painful. Half the mugs ended up abandoned in the sink while I was in the back room fielding calls from frustrated freight carriers who just wanted someone who understood routing times. I did not even tell them what had happened to me. I just handled it, like always. Some nights I stayed late, not because I had to, but because I could not stomach leaving things broken. I would sit at the back desk near the service elevator, headphones in, correcting shipment sequences, rebuilding timelines, and ensuring our vendors did not lose faith. I created a shadow folder on the server, labeled innocuously as Ops Archives, and started saving every correction I made. Every invoice I fixed, every delay I prevented, every error she missed. Not to weaponize it, just to keep a record, because one day someone would want answers, and I would be ready. Taryn never asked me how things were going. She assumed silence meant approval. I let her think that. It was easier than arguing. She would post weekly updates to the company intranet about our new momentum. In one post, she even mentioned how the transition team has been incredibly helpful. I almost laughed. The team was just me, and I was not helping her. I was protecting the company from her, one spreadsheet at a time. Every time I fixed something, it was not just about the task. It was about the people. Marco at Horizon, Janessa in procurement, Raj in compliance. They deserved better than buzzwords and slogans. They deserved someone who understood the stakes. So I did not mind working behind the scenes. I had been underestimated before. I had learned how to turn that into an advantage. And this time, I was not just cleaning up a mess. I was laying the groundwork for something much bigger. It did not matter how many Slack channels Taryn created. It did not matter how many updates she posted with colorful graphics and bold font titles like centralizing vendor synergy. The people who mattered, the vendors who moved our freight, the partners who had kept us afloat during the pandemic, the ones who had my cell number saved since 2014, they kept calling me directly, not out of defiance, out of survival. They knew where the real answers lived, and it sure was not in Taryn's dashboard. Marco from Horizon Freight had stopped replying to Taryn altogether. She had looped him into 3 different threads with vague requests for status updates, asking him to integrate insights into the long-tail vision of her rollout. He replied once with a question mark. That was it. A few days later, he called me after hours. "She talks too much," he said flatly. "You listen, you solve. That's the difference." I thanked him, even though I did not need the compliment. His continued trust spoke louder than any praise. I never interrupted Taryn's systems publicly. If she wanted to pretend her channels were the official pipeline, fine, let her. But while she broadcasted strategy from the main stage, I was operating from the wings, rebuilding manifests, resolving shipment errors, and clearing customs backlogs one file at a time. When Marco needed a reroute due to a labor strike in Tacoma, he called me. I handled it before Taryn even realized there was a delay. When another vendor, Loxley Imports, could not get clarity on which port their load was supposed to arrive at, they bypassed her entirely and messaged me on Signal. I did not make noise about it. I did not forward the messages or drop hints. What I did was document. Every call, every file I fixed, every corrected routing number, every freight that made it out the door, only because I stepped in quietly and did the work. I started keeping a private ledger, not because I was planning a takedown, at least not yet, but because I knew how these things played out. When the smoke clears and leadership finally realizes something is broken, the person with receipts is the person they take seriously. One night I got a call from Ephraim, our export partner in Rotterdam. His English is sharp but blunt. "Why do we deal with this woman?" he asked. I laughed, not out of amusement but resignation. "It's temporary," I said. "Just hang in there." He paused and said, "We trust you, not her. When she sends instructions, we double-check them with your old documents." That hit me harder than I expected. It reminded me why I had stayed quiet, why I had not walked away when they gave her my title. Loyalty, not to the company, but to the people who had stood by me for over a decade. Taryn, for her part, seemed clueless. She still strutted into meetings, quoting articles she barely understood. She ran surveys asking vendors how they felt about the Partnership Realignment Initiative. Most of them did not respond. Some even blocked her. Bryce, our VP, was too far removed to notice. All he saw were the quarterly slides and the marketing-friendly metrics that Taryn packaged so neatly. But beneath that gloss, the current was shifting, and I felt it. In every direct call, every urgent email with the subject line, "Can you help?" I had no authority left but influence. That was something you earn, over years, through storms, in silence. These vendors did not owe me anything. They chose to stick with me because I had shown up when it counted, when their shipments were stranded, when ports were backed up, when payments stalled. They remembered, and they knew I would not let their business collapse just because some executive wanted a flashy rebrand. So I kept fixing, I kept tracking, and I kept my voice low, not because I was scared, but because I wanted the evidence to build itself, like water wearing down stone. The day would come when someone would ask, "How did we lose Horizon? Why did Loxley pull out? Why are we behind on every major route?" And when that happened, they would not get theories. They would get data. From me. Quietly compiled, unshakably clear, and by then it would be too late for excuses. It was still early when Janessa appeared at my cubicle, clutching her tablet like it had just burned her hands. She did not say anything right away, just stood there, lips tight, eyes darting toward the glass walls of the executive wing. Finally, she leaned in and whispered, "Marco says Horizon is considering a pullout. Taryn's driving them crazy, and Bryce will not admit it is falling apart." I sat back slowly, taking that in. I wish I could say I was surprised, but the truth is, I had been waiting for this storm since the day they handed my role to someone who thought freight velocity was a marketing term. "Can you stop it?" Janessa asked. I smiled, calm and quiet. "Not yet. Horizon handled almost 40% of our long-haul logistics. Without them, our West Coast distribution would grind to a crawl. Delays would ripple out to retail partners, our SLA numbers would tank, and procurement costs would skyrocket from all the emergency rerouting. Taryn had no clue how close we were to collapse. She was too busy designing a new supplier confidence dashboard to track loyalty sentiment. Except, loyalty is not a pie chart. It is a phone call from Rotterdam at 2 a.m. or a customs broker in San Diego who trusts your word more than a PDF, and she had not earned a single one of those. I asked Janessa what exactly Marco had said. She tapped open a message on her screen and turned it toward me. It was short, brutally clear. "We are exploring alternatives. We do not trust your director. She does not listen. Carmen always did." That was it. No emotion. Just a final warning wrapped in facts. I told her to keep it quiet for now. If Bryce found out too early, he would either panic or worse, spin it into another internal realignment. We needed the moment to be undeniable. We needed Horizon to draw a line in the sand, and then we would show him the footprints leading to it. Later that day, I sat alone in the back conference room staring at my laptop. I pulled up my vendor log and added the new entry. Marco, 6:53 a.m., considering pullout, no confidence in current leadership. I added it to a growing spreadsheet I had been keeping for weeks, an archive of every warning, every issue escalated to me instead of Taryn, every dollar saved because I quietly corrected a mistake she never even saw. I was not gathering evidence for revenge. I was gathering it because I knew how this would end. They always say they did not see it coming. I was making sure someone did. The next day, Taryn posted another Slack message. Reminder, all vendor inquiries must go through me or my support team. Direct communication outside our structure is a breach of alignment. I read it, took a sip of coffee, and forwarded a customs invoice directly to Marco anyway. He replied with a thank you and an update on container 4143. Still stuck in Oakland, he added. Taryn thinks it is in LA. I shook my head. Her dashboard showed a blue dot in Southern California, but the manifest told a different story, a real one. I started staying later at the office, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to be around when something cracked. Vendors were getting louder, even if they were not public yet. A shipment got misrouted to Phoenix, and the warehouse manager called me directly, skipping 3 levels of hierarchy. Is she doing this on purpose? He asked. No, I said. She just does not know how to track manifest metadata. He exhaled hard and muttered, that explains everything. I logged the call. By Friday, I had 24 documented missteps tied directly to Taryn's decisions. Most of them never made it to the leadership level because I intercepted them, fixed them, smoothed them over. That was the irony. They had demoted me, and I was the one still holding the company together with invisible threads. But threads can only hold so long before the seams show. And now the stitching was starting to tear. I could have blown the whistle. I could have printed everything and walked into Bryce's office with a red binder and a 3-minute speech. But that is not how this worked. Not if I wanted lasting change. No, I needed them to feel the pain, to see the fire before they asked where the smoke came from. So I kept watching, kept documenting, kept fixing quietly, because the moment was coming. And when it hit, I would not need to say a word. The truth would speak loud enough. I am not a vindictive person. I do not believe in office gossip or petty sabotage, but I do believe in insurance, the kind you build quietly, one file at a time, while people like Taryn crash the car and expect you to clean the windshield. So when I saw the pattern forming, missed deadlines, mixed up freight routes, unpaid vendor balances, I opened a new Excel workbook on my personal drive and titled it, Continuity Review, Internal. Not revenge, not spite, just protection, just truth in rows and columns. It started with a delayed customs form. Taryn forgot to send a bill of lading to the Port Authority on a 3-container shipment. That one error caused a 4-day backup in Tacoma, which meant late penalties, vendor frustration, and rescheduled trucks from the Washington warehouse. When she shrugged it off in a team meeting and called it a transition hiccup from legacy workflows, I knew exactly how this was going to go. She would break it, blame it on me, then try to repaint the mess in pastel colors. I pasted the incident into my file, time-stamped it, linked the email thread, and labeled it Incident 001, Tacoma Bottleneck, Avoidable Delay. I was just getting started. By the end of that week, I had logged 5 more incidents. Each one included source emails, Slack threads, file revisions, and in 2 cases, audio notes from vendor calls. I recorded one with Marco, just for my own sanity. In it, he sighed and said, "She keeps asking me about capacity elasticity. I told her I need a signed invoice, not a TED Talk." That line went into the notes, not because I wanted to embarrass her, but because I needed context, evidence. If leadership ever decided to take a real look, I wanted them to see the full story, not just her color-coded dashboards. I set a nightly reminder on my phone. Update the file. After work, while the building emptied out, I would sit quietly at my desk, compiling screenshots, reviewing Slack history, saving PDFs. I added tags by category, billing, routing, customs, vendor comms, and gave each entry a severity level from 1 to 5. I created a dashboard of my own. No flashy colors, no meaningless acronyms, just data. Raw, verified, dated. It was my shield. My proof that I had been holding the line while someone else played dress-up in a director's title. When I showed Janessa a sanitized version of the file, no names, just process failures, her eyes widened. "You have all this," she whispered. "Why?" I gave her a simple answer. "Because they are going to need someone to blame, and I am making sure it is not me." She nodded slowly. She understood. We were not running on strategy anymore. We were running on duct tape and denial, and I was the only one collecting the receipts. At some point, I stopped thinking of it as just insurance. It became a kind of journal, a record of survival. I was not trying to destroy anyone. I was just refusing to disappear. They could strip me of a title, but they could not erase 14 years of operational knowledge, or the relationships I had built, or the backbone I had grown in the silence. Every entry I made was a reminder to myself. I still mattered. I still knew how to do this better than anyone. Taryn, of course, had no idea. She continued hosting alignment huddles, where she read off bullet points from articles she did not understand. She renamed our file archive Opsverse. She sent out a team-wide poll asking us how logistically inspired we felt this quarter, and every time she did, I added another note to the file. I was not angry anymore, just patient. The storm was forming, and I had the map, the umbrella, and a front row seat. When this finally hit the fan, and it would, I would not have to raise my voice. I would not have to say, "I told you so." I would simply open the file, slide it across the table, and say, "Here is everything, every fix, every failure, every time I saved this place without credit." That was not revenge. That was just the truth. And the truth, as I was learning, is the most powerful backup plan of all. It happened on a Wednesday morning, the kind of morning where the coffee is weak and the printer jams for no reason. I was halfway through reconciling an invoice from a minor supplier when Janessa came barreling toward my desk like a woman running from a fire. Her eyes were wide, her mouth open, but no words came out at first, just this stunned little gasp. I looked up and said, "What now?" She leaned in and whispered, 7 Horizon containers are missing from the system. Vanished. No scans, no customs. They are just gone. My stomach did not even drop. I had been expecting something like this. Taryn had been cutting corners and delegating accountability for weeks. Her version of supply chain control was a carousel of Slack threads and Google Sheets with emojis in the column headers. I stood up, walked to my old dashboard, which she renamed the Movement Hub, and refreshed it. Nothing. No entries, no logs, no alerts. 7 international freight containers carrying $1.3 million worth of product had disappeared like a magician's final trick. Taryn, of course, went into spin mode. She bounced into the main conference room like she was hosting a webinar and started tossing out phrases like data sync latency and vendor-side integration gaps. Bryce sat across from her, arms folded, his jaw locked tight. He was not buying it. Not this time. And then the video call with Horizon started. Marco was there, along with 3 of their senior logistics managers. I stayed quiet, off camera, sitting near the back wall, listening. Taryn led with blame. "We've been experiencing inconsistencies on your end," she said. "Our internal team flagged a lack of tracking input from Horizon's portal last week, so we believe this is a vendor-side blackout." Marco interrupted her mid-sentence. His voice was flat, cold. He said, "Taryn, stop. We have every record, every clearance scan, every port exit timestamp. We sent them. You lost them. Your system failed again." There was silence, and then he dropped the hammer. Horizon will no longer fulfill any contracts under the current leadership structure. Effective immediately, all communication must go through Carmen Ellis only, or we walk. He said my name with total calm, like it had always been the only name that mattered. Bryce blinked. Taryn turned to look at me like I had rigged the call, like I had somehow bribed Marco into loyalty. But I did not say a word. I just folded my arms and stared back at her. The boardroom was quiet for a full 10 seconds. You could hear the hum of the HVAC system. Bryce looked from Marco to me, then back at Taryn. His voice, when it finally came out, was low and tight. "Is this true?" Taryn opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Marco spoke again. "You had one of the most reliable operational liaisons in the industry? You buried her under a fake job title and let chaos run the floor. We are not working with chaos." Then he ended the call. Taryn's face turned a shade I can only describe as panic pink. She stood there with her tablet still in her hand, completely frozen. I watched her swallow hard, then mumble something about needing to verify internal logs. Bryce waved her off. He did not even look at her. He turned to me and said, "Carmen, do you have any insight into what went wrong?" I nodded once. "Yes, I do." I could feel my insurance file like a weight in my bag. Every missed manifest, every diverted route, every fix I had quietly made. I had all of it, and now they were finally ready to look. I spent the rest of the afternoon pulling the data. I gave Bryce the cleaned version, no commentary, no blame, just the facts, clear and dated. He read through it in silence, flipping page after page like someone realizing they had been living in a house full of termites. Taryn, meanwhile, had locked herself in a breakout room and was supposedly investigating process redundancies. Nobody cared. By 5:00 p.m., a memo went out to leadership. Effective immediately, all logistics escalation would root through me. Taryn's title remained, but her authority had vanished, just like the containers. The irony? I did not even want her job back. I just wanted people to stop pretending I had never done it. That was the difference between her and me. She chased visibility. I built stability. And when it all collapsed, only one of us still had a name that meant something. This was not my victory speech. That would come later. This was just the moment everything snapped. And when it did, I did not raise my voice. I did not say, "I told you so." I just stood in the rubble, calm, ready, and holding the only blueprint that still worked. The next morning, Bryce called me into the executive boardroom. Just after 8:30, no calendar invite, no subject line, just a 2-word Slack ping, "Now, boardroom." When I walked in, it was him, Taryn, and 2 board members, Daniel Cho and Lila Brennan, both of whom I had seen in town halls but never sat face-to-face with. Taryn looked like she had not slept. Her eyes were puffy, her blazer wrinkled. She barely looked at me as I took a seat at the far end of the long table. Bryce cleared his throat. "Carmen," he said, "can you explain what happened yesterday? Walk us through it, briefly." His tone was different now. No more casual condescension, no more performative optimism. This was a man in damage control mode. I nodded, reached into my leather folder, and pulled out a printed 5-page summary from my insurance file. Each page had dates, timestamps, vendor interactions, and key system failures. No finger pointing, just bulletproof facts. I started with the Horizon containers. The real story, not just that they went missing, but how tracking entries had stopped syncing 2 weeks ago, when Taryn disabled the manual override I had used to catch scan errors. Then I showed them the email from Marco, dated 3 days prior, warning that Horizon would reevaluate the contract if errors continued. I did not embellish. I did not editorialize. I let the document speak louder than any outrage could. Taryn tried to interrupt. But that file is based on legacy workflows that Carmen implemented, which I was trying to modernize. The errors. Bryce held up a hand. He did not even look at her. Let her finish. That was the first time I had ever heard him cut someone off like that. I continued. I pointed out how vendor communications had shifted over the past month, how Horizon, Iron South, and even smaller carriers like LinkTrack had stopped responding to Taryn entirely and started contacting me directly. I showed screenshots, call logs, vendor quotes, including one from Marco. "We trust Carmen. We do not trust the current chain of command." Daniel Cho leaned forward. "Why did none of us know about this?" he asked. Taryn glanced around like she wanted to crawl under the table. I stayed calm. "Because I was never trying to make noise," I said. "I just wanted the freight to move, the clients to get their orders, the partners to stay on board. I fixed things quietly because that is what the job requires. Not buzzwords, not dashboards with cartoon icons, just consistency." Lila Brennan narrowed her eyes. "You never raised a red flag?" I smiled gently. "Only when asked, which until now I never was." She nodded slowly, like someone piecing together a puzzle that had been sitting in front of her all along. Taryn looked like she wanted to speak again, but Bryce beat her to it. "And we overlooked you, Carmen," he said plainly. "You were solving problems before we even knew we had them. And we let the illusion of modern leadership blind us to what was actually holding the operation together." He turned toward the board members. I think the time for quiet contributions is over. We need to make some decisions, fast. Taryn's lips parted in protest, but nothing came out, just the sound of defeat. I stood, gently placed the 5 pages in front of Bryce and said, "Everything you need is in there." I did not gloat. I did not smirk. I was not interested in revenge by humiliation. That was not my style. My revenge was always quieter, slower, the kind that let truth do all the work. I walked out without looking back. As I returned to my desk, yes, the one outside the supply closet where they stashed me, I passed Janessa, who raised her eyebrows. "That fast, huh?" she whispered. I just smiled and said, "They are finally listening." And for once, they really were. The message had landed. Not because I shouted, but because when it all collapsed, I was still standing, calm, prepared, and holding the answers they had ignored. That was the real wake-up call. Not for me, for them. They reinstated me the next day. No dramatic apology, no official statement. Just a closed-door meeting and a freshly printed badge with a brand new title, Director of Logistics and Vendor Strategy. It was not even a real department. They made it up on the spot, probably to avoid admitting I was just getting my old job back. I smiled, took the badge, and said thank you. That was all. Bryce avoided eye contact. Lila nodded at me with something that almost looked like respect. And Taryn? She did not show up to work that week. According to Janessa, her Slack went silent sometime around 6 p.m. the night before. I walked back into my old office, technically a new one now, on the second floor with a corner view, and shut the door gently behind me. Same desk layout, same vendor folders, even the old framed picture of my team from the 2019 Supply Summit, still sitting in the bottom drawer. I left it there. I was not back to relive the past. I was back to steady the present. That morning, I drafted a clean memo addressed to all our major freight partners: Horizon, Iron South, Blue Line, and Trident Transport. It was short, factual, and calm. Operations are now under full control. All correspondence can resume through my office. I look forward to reestablishing consistency. Marco from Horizon replied within 30 minutes. "Knew you'd be back," was all he wrote. No fluff, no surprise. And that simple sentence hit harder than any standing ovation could. He had known what I knew, that letting the wrong person take the wheel would only end one way. But still, he waited, patiently. And when I returned, he did not ask questions. He just moved forward. That was how it went for the rest of the week. Quiet resets. Phone calls that used to take 3 days now resolved in 10 minutes. Dashboards scrubbed clean of glittery nonsense and rebuilt with the practical clarity we actually needed. I did not bring up Taryn. Not to Bryce, not to the team, not to anyone. There was nothing to say. Her failure was loud enough. I did not need to raise my voice to compete with it. By Friday, Janessa knocked on my office door and popped her head in. "Your new title sounds like a Marvel villain," she teased. I laughed for the first time in weeks. "Well," I said, "maybe now I finally get a costume." She grinned, then leaned in a little more seriously. "They owe you, Carmen." I shook my head. They owed themselves better judgment. I was just here the whole time. She nodded slowly and stepped out without another word. Later that day, Bryce sent me a Slack message that simply said, "Appreciate you." I responded with a thumbs-up emoji. That was the extent of it. I did not need a parade. I did not want a plaque. My satisfaction came from the fact that every vendor, every internal manager, every quiet employee who had been holding their breath now knew where the real competence lived. And that was enough. I think the most powerful revenge is not slamming doors or burning bridges. It is standing still while the chaos passes you by, watching the people who tried to replace you realize, slowly, painfully, that they were never ready. Taryn failed because she wanted the image of leadership. I succeeded because I never stopped doing the work. And I made sure that when everything cracked open, the right people were watching. In the end, they did not clap. They did not cheer, but they followed my lead, and that is all I ever wanted. To do my job well, be trusted, and not be treated like I had expired just because someone shinier came along. I did not need to destroy her. I just let her run the play. I sat back, I waited, and I made sure when the lights came up, they saw exactly who had kept the house standing. Quiet revenge, calm redemption, and a perfectly timed promotion no one could argue with. That was my conference room moment, and I earned every second of it.